Hello and welcome to the Rizzi Softball and High Yield Tomatoes, a 100-year love story of family and food with Regina Rizzi Santor. I'm Janine Shepard, the Education and Engagement Manager, and I'll be your host for this session. Thank you to Organic Valley for sponsoring this session. Organic Valley is a cooperative company that is run and owned by a bunch of organic farmers. We're really excited to have their financial support. Before I get started, I'd like to turn your attention to the community agreements. Throughout this conference, we agree to be respectful, curious, and patient, speak from our own experiences, avoiding jargon, be conscious of intent versus impact, take space, make space, and take care of yourself. Hello, Regina. We are here today with Regina Santor. Regina Rizzi Santor of Knoxville, Tennessee is a lifelong vegetable gardener and the donor of family heirloom tomato seeds now in the Seed Savers Exchange Seed Bank. Regina continues to raise the Rizzi family heirloom tomatoes for canning and making her family's signature tomato sauce in the way she was taught by her father, Salvatore. Today, Regina will be talking about these recently donated tomato seeds, how this tomato has been a part of her family's story for the past 100 years, and how it can become a part of yours. Please feel free to add comments and questions to the chat as Regina presents. There will be time for Q&A at the end. Regina, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited. So as mentioned, I'm the steward of my family's tomato seeds. We have two varieties that we've been growing for at least 100 years, from Italy to Endicott, New York, to Tennessee, Vermont, Georgia, and now through the help of seedsavers.org, all throughout the United States and at least one spot in Canada. That's thrilling for me. So a little bit about where the Rizzi family came from. The Rizzi family's ancestral home is Barletta, Italy, on the Achilles heel of the boot of Italy on the Adriatic Sea. It's a small place, but it has a few interesting historical notes. Pictured here is the Colossus of Barletta, 3 times the size of a man. It is the statue of a Roman emperor. His name is lost to time, and it seems he started out somewhere else and was brought there in antiquity for reasons now unknown. It's the world's largest existing statue of a Roman emperor. But there's a funny story. The locals call him Heraclio, Hercules, and he's their mascot. And they tell a favorite story about how when the city was about to be attacked, which apparently happened kind of frequently, Heraclio jumped down from his giant pedestal and began to cry in front of the attackers, saying he was crying because all the other little boys called him Minuscolo, the tiny one, and he just knew he'd grow up big someday and show them. Thinking, gee, if he's the smallest one, the attackers became frightened and ran away. So anyway, history buffs here may also be familiar with Barletta as the place of Hannibal's great tactical victory over the Romans in the Battle of Cannae. And in Barletta, the name Rizzi is as common as Smith is here in the US. The name's origins are unclear, but it may be a shortening of cavallerizzi, meaning knights or riders or cavalrymen. Jousting was a big sport there in medieval times, apparently, so I guess there might have been a lot of knights around. So the big city around there is Bari. If you look at the map, you'll see it's just south of Barletta. All of these towns along the eastern edge of the Adriatic Sea were sailing towns for thousands of years. And the sailors of Bari are legendary for having stolen from Greece the bones of Santa Nicola, the patron saint of sailors, whom you know as Santa Claus. They stole Santa Claus. And you can still visit them there today and send postcards about it to your family, like the one you see here. They even have a festival of San Nicola each year. And Greece wants him back, by the way. So my Rizzi family had roots there in Barletta that went back at least 150 years, probably more. And like so many in that area, my great-grandfather Salvatore was a sailor as a young man, my father just told me yesterday. And he met his wife, Maddalena Filanino, when he brought his laundry to the shop where she worked. And the area was this gorgeous medieval place, apparently, literally covered in castles. They're all around there. If you look at that map, all those red things, they're all castles. And there's probably more than that. So even the farmers had tiny castles. These stone huts are called trulli. They're so medieval. And it was a place that was apparently spectacular for farming. Isn't that beautiful? Can you not just see knights galloping across that? The growing season was long. The land was very fertile. And I know you're thinking, okay, where do the tomatoes come in? I know you're thinking that. So originally bred by the Inca in the Andes Mountains of South America from a native plant in the nightshade family, cultivation of tomatoes had spread north to the Maya and then more north to the Aztecs by the time of contact with Europeans there. So when European explorers returned from the Americas in the 1500s, they brought Aztec tomatoes with them. If you know any Italian, you know the word for tomato is pomodoro. In the Southern Italian dialect, the word for apple was pomo. And d'oro means of gold. The apple of gold? Yep, the small tomatoes that Cortez brought back from Tenochtitlan in the Aztec Empire in 1521 were said to be yellow-orange and were likely Solanum pimpinellifolium, considered the ancestor of the modern tomato. Others brought back the other more modern species that had been cultivated by the Aztecs and Incas and Maya. And those are, red and other colors. As you may know, the tomato was not well received as a food in Europe, since it bore too much resemblance to plants that could kill you. Also, they had a vegetables are bad for you trend there for a while, apparently, in the Middle Ages. So, in the medieval times. So they were grown for their beauty mostly, but eventually someone tried eating them, who knows when, and they caught on in Italy. In 1790, the Roman chef Francesco Leonardi wrote a recipe book that described his tomato sauce. So it's likely that tomatoes were truly adopted in the late 1700s in Italy and might have been part of life in Barletta for at least 50 years before my great-grandfather's birth in 1868. So when my great-grandfather Salvatore was growing up in the mid to late 1800s, most people in Barletta were farmers. Chances are very good that by then they were growing a lot of tomatoes, since tomatoes and tomato sauce had by then become a huge part of Southern Italian culture, kind of a nationality, like a national pride symbol. Some people even think that the Italian flag symbolizes tomatoes with its red. And of course, the tomato's use in cuisine was making its way northward. And the farmers were doing well at that time, by all accounts. And that was something I didn't know when I started doing research for this presentation. I thought the Southern Italians had always had a hard life, had always been poor. I could not have been more wrong. Ancestry says that they were wealthy at one point and the envy of the North. I can't help but think that tomatoes had a lot to do with that. This is a map of my father's DNA-related relatives in that area. You can see he's pretty related to that whole place. So these relatives were all likely all affected by what happened next. Abruptly, it seems, life changed within one generation. The unification of Italy caused economic instability. Northern businessmen began greatly overcharging the farmers for goods needed to run their farms, as the new country didn't have rules in place to prevent taking advantage of others. Between 1875 and 1900, the northern businessmen forced the southern farmers into debt, and they found ways to take their land forcing them to continue to farm it for the northern owners or move into slums in Bari. And this scenario will sound familiar to anyone who's read The Grapes of Wrath. Conditions became so bad that by 1900, many families made the decision to leave. My mind is still reeling, thinking about how the rug was pulled out from under my great-grandfather and his relatives. They must have felt that Italy had been ruined. I'm certain they didn't want to leave that beautiful, fertile place, but they felt their choice was be poor forever here or go find opportunity somewhere else. Some went to Argentina, some went to Australia, and many, like my great-grandfather Salvatore, chose the United States. So great-grandfather Salvatore came alone in 1910 to scout out work opportunities and earn the money to bring his family to the United States. Upon arrival to Ellis Island, he was detained for special inquiry, possibly due to illness. The records indicate suspicion that he would be a burden to society. But after a hospital check and providing proof that he really was en route to his nephew in Howes Cave, New York, he was admitted to the United States. Probably he was insulted that he would be thought of in that way, someone who had come to improve his family's lot in life, but he just had to endure it. Like most immigrants, he took what work was available, excavating limestone from the face of the former tourist attraction Howes Cave for the Helderberg Cement Company to make concrete used to build skyscrapers, apartments, and factories in New York City during the pre-World War I building boom. My 91-year-old father, also named Salvatore, was told that his grandfather led the oxen that pulled the wagon loads of stone from the blast site. I have learned that this was typical immigrant work all over the United States at that time. It was back-breaking hard work, and most people didn't return after the first year. Salvatore worked at that job for 9 years. In 1911, the year after he arrived, having gotten set up in America, Salvatore sent for his teenage son, Vito Antonio, my grandfather, to work with him at the limestone quarry. He was 14 at the time, traveling under the care of a cousin. Vito Antonio's job was carrying water for the oxen, my father said. The Library of Congress reports that Italian immigrants frequently found themselves toiling for low pay in unhealthy working conditions. At the turn of the 20th century, Southern Italian immigrants were among the lowest paid workers in the United States. Child labor was common. Vito Antonio, who became Vito very quickly, I expect, because that's quite a mouthful, returned to Italy at some point, came back to the U.S. unaccompanied, this time at age 16, so in 1913. And he went back to Italy again around 1917 and was immediately conscripted into the Italian army, likely upon debarking the ship. Vito was sent to the front lines to fight for Italy in World War I, climbing the Alps toward Austria. He was shot, fortunately only in the butt, and was taken prisoner of war, which he remained until the end of the war in November 1918. So, there he is. He was kind of a handsome guy. Just gotta say that my cousin Joe looks so much like my grandfather Vito. The resemblance in these photos was really keen when Joe was younger. As soon as they could, in about 1920, they left Barletta. This is the family home in Barletta, apparently. First, they went to Howes Cave, New York area again, and that was actually Schenectady, New York. And Vito's sister Concetta met and married a boy there right away. And he was actually likely related to the family that my grandfather ended up marrying into. I just learned that. So anyway, it seems that this family told them about a place called Endicott, New York, where they could all work in a shoe factory, Endicott Johnson Shoes. Their relatives and friends were already there. And for our family, it was an American dream come true. In no time at all, they went from this to this. Vito married a girl he met in Endicott, Palmira Rotuno of Fondi, Italy, which is a little town between Rome and Naples. I've been there, and it also has a castle. And they married on May 10th, 1924. He worked hard, and isn't that a cute wedding? Look at that. Everybody looks so thrilled to have to sit there for this photo. He worked hard for Endicott Johnson Shoes for several years as a cutter. And by then, as a loyal, now married employee, he was eligible for an at-cost house built just for him by the company. Amazing. There's Vito close up in the cutting room, and there's Cousin Joe again. And now they even look, they're almost identical. They even have the same hairline. So anyway, the house was ready for occupancy exactly 1 year later in May 1925, just after the birth of their first child, Madeline. It was fully paid off within 20 years. I cannot believe that. Exactly 20 years later. And by the time they got the house, they had 9 children. And of course, the little guy there, you see the tiny little guy, Joe is the son of that guy right there. That's little Arthur. Joe is Arthur's son. I think my great-grandfather Salvatore would be the first to tell you how lucky his son was to go from being an uneducated immigrant, having barely more than the change in his pocket in 1919 at the age of 22, to a well-employed, middle-class family man with a paid-off house in just 26 years. It was a man named George F. Johnson who made that possible. And he was the owner of the Endicott Johnson Shoe Company. He himself had only a 6th grade education and often mentioned how he'd been so poor growing up that he didn't have the nickel that it cost to ride the carousel when he was a boy. As he rose through the management ranks at the shoe company that he and his partner, Henry Endicott, eventually purchased, he formed ideas about how he could change all that for his workers. George F. Johnson transformed the lives of tens of thousands of families in the Binghamton, Endicott, Johnson City area with his square deal policies, which included such unheard of things as health care and dental care for the whole family, all 11 of them, vacations, public parks with pools and lots of carousels that were free, and a 40-hour work week by 1919. And he sold those houses at $1,000 cost to the company, so actually below cost to each worker, and so much more. The workers were so appreciative that they erected home of the square deal marble arches in Endicott, New York, and Johnson City, New York, and they would hold spontaneous parades in his honor. If you're curious to learn more about George F. Johnson and his square deal, I suggest visiting the website that we were putting in the comments. It's a pretty spectacular story. Literally, I don't think I would be sitting here right now if it weren't for the amazing thing that that man did. So we don't know exactly when, but at some point in the very early 1920s, once they were established in Endicott, and perhaps even while still renting with his father, Salvatore, my grandfather, Vito, wrote to his sister the words that are the reason I'm speaking to you today. Mandami I semi di pomodoro. Send me the tomato seeds. And she did, glued into the closure of the envelope. So while the USDA did exist at that time, Far from preventing seeds from coming into the US, they were trying to identify and disseminate beneficial seeds. It seems more likely she was trying to ensure they didn't fall out while crossing the ocean to her brother. Whatever her reasons, the important thing is they made it, and their offspring are still with us today. We don't know anything of Vito's childhood years and where his deep love of growing food or his extensive knowledge about it came from. We can only surmise that this was part of being from Barletta, that it was a part of the culture of the people there. I'm certain that after the long years spent doing hard labor at Howe's Cave and the turmoil and upheaval of moving to a new continent, Salvatore and Vito both needed to have a place to have some peace. Salvatore was never a great gardener by all accounts, but he cared enough to buy a plot of land on which to garden, even though he and Maddalena remained renters for the rest of their lives. Vito, on the other hand, he had talent and a passion for growing things, especially the tomatoes. By the time he had 11 mouths to feed, his garden took up nearly the entire backyard. And he grew a huge amount of food every year. He grew many things, but it was his forest of tomatoes that the family remembers most vividly. My sister, Donna Rizzi McKinley, remembers that instead of shrubs against the house and along the property line, he had tomatoes that he grew from the seed sent by his sister. Vito loved to garden. It's all any of us grandchildren can remember him doing. He was always in the garden. If you wanted to see him, you were going to have to go out to the garden because he wasn't going to come in to see you. He was busy in the garden. So this is my grandfather, Vito, with my cousin, Mary Beth Rizzi Ventris, around 1968. Look at the smile on his face. You can just tell he's thrilled that she's enjoying the garden. So compared to Mediterranean Italy, that cool northeastern climate in Endicott must have taken some getting used to. The growing season must have seemed very short to him, but clearly he found a way to work with it. My father says that his father extended the season by sowing his seeds against the warmest, most sheltered part of the foundation of the house in early spring, protecting them as much as he could with straw when needed, and transplanting them once they were large enough. Even today, my most vigorous early volunteers come up next to the warmest part of my own foundation. I'm going to have to try his method in that spot with my saved seeds rather than starting them out indoors as usual. He certainly had great results. Vito's coddling and fussing over each tomato plant was also legendary in our family. This is his barrel, a 50-gallon drum, probably from the tannery at the shoe factory, in which he made his manure tea. My father says his father would give each plant a little drink. They'd get a little drink from the barrel every day. Next to it looks like a bathtub probably for growing greens, positioned up on blocks so the excess water would flow downward toward the drain hole. Apparently, my grandfather was a practical man, and the goal was grow as much food as possible in the smallest space, and he managed to get it done. So I barely remember any of this, and yet somehow I'm a vegetable gardener just like him. It's like it's in my genes that I need to do this. I can't explain it. Every year, Vito would put up his sticks, as my father calls them. Right? Now, look at these. These are not sticks. These things are huge. The tomato plants are huge. They're indeterminate plants that vigorously sucker, especially from the bases, and they get heavy and require very sturdy support. So why would you go through all of this trouble for a tomato? Well, you haven't tried this tomato. That's all I can say. But how did Vito come to gardening and working with these tomatoes from the 1920s until he just couldn't do it anymore, somewhere around 1980? By the time I was aware of what he was doing, he'd had over 50 years of experience growing these tomatoes. Why did he do it? As a transplant from another place myself, I know that there are foods from home that you just can't get when you move to another place. Anyone who has moved, as I have, from the Northeast to the South will tell you that you just can't get good Italian bread in the South, especially not as good as this kind from home. A food that Endicott is widely known for is also speedies, which are charcoal grilled bits of skewered meat that were marinated in something tangy and delicious and served on a fresh slice of this local Italian bread. So if you're ever in Binghamton, in the summer, do not miss the chance to try speedies. Spiedini means skewers in Italian, by the way, so I assume that's how they got their name. I recommend the chicken or the pork or lamb if you can get it. So, Endicott was also great for pizza, as you might expect. We had more places that served square pies or the Sicilian-style sheet pizza in Endicott, which was great for feeding your ravenous family and friends and makes a fantastic morning after breakfast when you're at a sleepover. As a kid, that's what we all ate for breakfast at our friends' houses. We also had the Neapolitan or New York style pizzas, and those were also very good. It takes some real hunting to find good pizza in the South, I will tell you. But Speedies, that's something that we transplants have to import, or at least we have to import the sauce and learn to make them ourselves. So just a guess, I think that what these foods are for me, a taste of home, that Rizzi softball tomatoes, that's what it were for him. That's what it was for him. Every time he ate them or a sauce made from them, and it is especially delicious, it reminded him of home, times long past, his childhood, a time when Italy was beautiful and sweet. And I'll tell you that it's what drives me to grow them and keep it going. I can't imagine not having that taste for the rest of my life, or not ever getting to experience it. That fear is what drove me to contact Seed Savers Exchange to donate the varieties my grandfather spent his life perfecting. So did he know what he was doing right from the start? I can't say. Maybe he was just as fumbling as I was when I started growing them. Maybe he found his way little by little. Maybe someone back in Barletta had already taught him. That's all lost to time. My father said that his father saved only the seeds from the best tomatoes, the plants that yielded more or the fruits that were extra tasty. He was careful about his choices so that each successive harvest would greater approximate the vision he had for them in his mind. I try to do that too. The seeds Immaculata sent to Vito were clearly already very special tomato seeds, already important to our family in Italy, and these are what we now call the Rizzi softball plum tomato and the Rizzi high-yield plum tomato. Since our family is still growing them after 100 years, Seed Savers Exchange said we could be proud to call them our very own. I know my grandfather would be tickled to find out that people all over the country want to grow his tomato. He would just love that. The Rizzi softball plum tomato is legendary in our family, not just for its enormous size. Some individuals can be nearly a pound, like this one, which weighed in at only 14 ounces. There it is. And you can see why our name for this is the softball, because it can be as large as a softball. Here's one that I grew this past season that was 15.5 ounces, but I think I can do better. I call this one the monster, and I've saved seed from it separately to see what its offspring produce. So far, they are much more vigorous than the rest of my plants. Who knows what their fruit are going to look like, so we're waiting to see, but I have a feeling that I will have something to report at the end of the season. As I was saying, it is legendary, not just for its size, but for its taste. This is literally the most delicious tomato I have ever tasted, and I have tried every tomato I have ever come across. I try them all. They cannot compare to this. Tomatoes have umami, and some of them have more of it than others. This one has so much. A really perfect one is almost like steak. It's hard to explain. I can't really describe it. You just have to experience it for yourself. So, also, it is truly a plum tomato. You can and should make tomato sauce with it. It's a little more watery than a true paste tomato, but not as watery as your average slicer. The skin is not thick or thin. It easily comes off if placed in a boiling bath for a minute or so. The skins should be passed through the sieve, though, since the best paste comes from nearest the outer skin. The seed chambers have a distinctive shape on this tomato. It is a very thick-walled, thick-hearted tomato. It's all meat, practically. My father, Sal, said he'd usually find one in his lunchbox as a kid. There he is as a kid. And this tomato is just as good as an eater as it is a sauce tomato. I mean, it is such a versatile, amazing food. Here's my dad at my wedding in 2009. They have the same eyes. Still, don't you think he has the same eyes? So this is, let's see here. A sauce, I should say that this is, sorry, I got lost. Unlike all the other large tomatoes, the softball is sweet, but it isn't all sugar. It has the right flavor for a good sauce. The right flavor has a bit of a bite to it, tangy, but not sour. All right, that's the Italian way would be that there's a sweet spot. And it's not an acidic tomato. It doesn't give us what you might call agita. That's what the Italians call it when you have, an upset stomach. You ate too late at night, and then it's visiting you all night. This sauce tends to not do that. So a sauce made purely from this tomato, though, it tends to be too thin. If you try to cook it down to the right consistency, it'll taste a little overcooked. And this is why Vito also grew the high-yield plum tomato to thicken this sauce. The flowers of the softball tomato are closed and perfect, so they require buzz pollination by large native bees, such as carpenter bees, to really shake that pollen down so the fruit forms. So don't kill your carpenter bees. Just take the thing that they were eating and make a new thing for them somewhere in your garden. They'll just move over because they know what wood they were born in, and they come back to it every year. They're kind of like Italians. They form a community with each other. They remember place. And so too, if you give them that spot, they will reward you by taking care of your garden. Carpenter bees are important. So if you let this tomato plant grow naturally, the Rizzi softball tomato plant is about 12 feet long. The high yield tomato plant looks similar, but it'll naturally be more like 8 feet long, and the diameter of the branches will not be as large. So it will naturally form a candelabra shape with 6 to 8 canes branching off within the first to 8 inches at the main stem at ground level. And if the seedling is planted deeply, which I highly suggest, the whole body of the seedling becomes a thick, deep root that's important for developing a lush plant. The softball and the high yield tomatoes both want even moisture, preferably from root level, and cool roots in the heat of summer. My grandfather Vito didn't have to worry about this, as summers in Endicott rarely surpassed 86 degrees. It was like perfect temperature for tomatoes all summer. His little drink ensured that they got their even moisture. So without even moisture, tomato fruits can develop blossom end rot or black heart. It's often thought that these are caused by low nutrients such as calcium, but inconsistent moisture appears to be the trigger. So you got to figure out a way to keep them evenly moist. Not just my tomatoes, but pretty much any tomatoes. So my hot southern climate in Knoxville is much more like the conditions in Barletta, hot, except that we have very high humidity. They had a breeze from the ocean, so but we don't. And the high humidity means that pathogens from the soil have a much easier time taking hold on the tomato plant leaves and spreading. And so to combat this and to retain the soil moisture, I cover the soil with sheet plastic, as the commercial growers do. And I use a root level watering system made of simple PVC parts. They're not even glued together. I literally just sort of stick them together and have them, holes drilled in them. And they are buried at the root level. And I can just take my hose and pop it into the end of the tube system and water them for a little bit and take it out. If I want to fertilize them at the root system, I can put that in there too. So it's very simple. But I will say that I really don't water them a whole lot with this method. There's just not a reason, unless it hasn't rained in weeks, to really have to water, because the plastic is retaining that moisture. So white sheet plastic is best in hot locations because it reflects the sun's heat and keeps the roots cool. If you're in a northern climate where the ground might always be a little bit cool, you might not want white. Maybe you want black. I don't know. Planting deeply also ensures cool roots. And if the tomato is too warm, it will not blossom. Not just my tomatoes, any tomatoes. They won't blossom if they're too hot. And they won't ripen the fruits that are on the vine. Soil temperatures need to be about 85 degrees or lower for proper production. So the first year that I tried to grow these in Tennessee, it was in raised beds at a community garden, and I did everything wrong. I know they didn't get consistent moisture since I wasn't there every day, and the raised beds would have led to really hot roots. And since the soil was exposed, the plants got sick. I got maybe 2 tomatoes. Most of the tomatoes that did form before it got really hot, they fell off before they could ripen. Fruit fall is a sign that your tomato plant is really unhappy. In these varieties, my varieties, the best, largest, and tastiest fruits form low on the vines. Like you see in this photo here, I trimmed away the plant so that you could really see where on the plant. The plants go a long distance beyond where you're seeing, but the fruits are there at the very base. This is the first year before I just wanted them to free form, and I wanted to see what they were going to be. And they actually can hold themselves up. I'll get to that. But I basically, in these varieties, of course, like I said, the fruits are low, and I don't prune the base suckers off personally. I let that candelabra form. So this year is my 3rd year growing these in my home garden in my new location here in Knoxville. So not the community garden. So my plan is to give them a flat top haircut when they get about 4 feet tall this year. instead of letting them grow, because the growth after 4 feet seemed to be a waste. The tomatoes don't get as large and they don't have that special taste. One thing I should add about these tomatoes is both varieties ripen really well off the vine. And I've heard that some don't. We've just never had that problem. My husband will tell you that our countertop is covered in tomatoes late in the year that I am letting take their time to ripen. As long as you see that the tip has at least sort of turned white on the vine, you're good to remove it and it will ripen beautifully. To be successful with these tomatoes, I said you must keep them moist, cool, and protected from soil exposure. But even trimming can be problematic. So here's the plants living naturally and supporting themselves on their elbows. Remember, I told you they had a method of supporting themselves. I find it very interesting, but they have branches that are clearly evolved for them to sort of stand on the branches to keep the plant upright. It was so interesting to see. Anyway, here is the plants, same plants a few days after me trimming them. And you can see that the plant on the left that was trimmed got sick. Now, I quickly lost most of that plant. Perhaps my clippers were unclean. I don't know. What I do know is that these tomatoes are sensitive to disease, so you have to take care if you're going to grow them. So this is a great time to mention my Uncle Lou. All right, somewhere between childhood and middle age, my Uncle Lou picked up the gardening bug. He worked at Endicott Johnson too, and he was an avid musician playing brass instruments with many groups. But the other thing people in our family know him for is his garden and his forest of tomatoes. His backyard was covered in them. He did it differently than his father. He used fence. His son, Richard, my cousin, said that he would give them the flat top at 4 feet. And that he and my grandfather both practiced suckering and made him and my cousin Julian sucker all of the plants at my grandfather's house. So personally, I haven't suckered them, and I still get about 12 pounds of tomatoes per plant. I might give it a try on some of them, and this year we'll see. Maybe I could do better. I don't know. So Lou's garden was magnificent. And I went to see him, and I was shocked in 2010 when I brought my baby to see him, and I discovered he didn't have his garden. And I asked him, and he said with a sad look in his eyes that he couldn't do it anymore. And I said that was a shame, and I really missed the family tomatoes that were the ones that were so big and so tasty. And he told me, hang on a minute. And he went in the other room, and he came back with this red medicine vial, and in it were the seeds, the tomato seeds. I couldn't believe it. And he told me how to save the seeds. You put them in a bowl with a little bit of water so they don't dry out, and they'll get a white mold on them and smell bad. And, I thought that was magic. But it just takes a day or two, and then you wash them off and let them dry on a paper towel, and they can last. And he told me that in the 1990s, cleaning out my grandparents' house, he found a vial of seeds that were saved by my great-grandpa Salvatore in the 1940s. And he tried them, and they grew out fine. They were 50-year-old seeds, and they were fine. So, he also said he didn't save the seeds from these varieties separately. And I said, well, how are you going to tell the difference? He said, well, one of them is bigger than the other. So the one that I'm calling the high yield is the smaller one. You can see it's more normal sized, and the fruit is, a little harder. It's thinner walled, but the whole thing is pretty much meat. There's almost no seeds in this thing. Its seeds are a little more teardrop shaped, and obviously larger and different than the other ones under a microscope. Here's my garden today. After 100 years, they're still out there growing in a Rizzi garden. My cousins have been trying it too. I want to encourage you to get pictures of you with the food that you make, the things people in your family know you for. Get pictures of you doing that. Get pictures of you in your garden. Because, I mean, it's a shame. I don't have photos to show you of these people doing these things. So I'm trying to make a point to have that for me for the future for my family. Here's a young softball tomato. The tomatoes have had a rough year this year. Nobody knows why. I'm sure that my uncle and my grandfather had tough years also. What can you do? And then also, the women. It's amazing I haven't talked about the women. It's been about the men, but the women were the ones who did the hard work of processing the hundreds of tomatoes, the hundreds of pounds of tomatoes that my grandfather grew every year. They canned them so the family could eat the Sunday tomato sauce all winter and spring. These women worked tirelessly. My memories of my grandmother are mostly of her working in the kitchen, and what she was doing was processing tomatoes, and the smell was fantastic. And I would always wonder why I didn't get any of my grandmother's sauce. And I asked my cousin Michael once, I said, did you ever get any of it? He said, no. Well, my sister knows why. She said, well, there were like 17 or 18 of us cousins for one thing. And this was for their use, not for our Sunday eating pleasure. And so apparently my father got his hand smacked once for dipping bread into the sauce one too many times when we were visiting. And in general, this is all she did all the time. And finally, what about Salvatore? Great grandfather. So here's my grandparents in their old age, by the way. And then, so Salvatore, well, he never owned a home, like I said, but I think he felt his job was done. He launched his kids, they prospered. And as an old man, he was the janitor at the Catholic church that was across the street from his shack, as my father called it. And not long after my great-grandmother Madalena died, a young priest offered to take my grandfather with him to Italy for 6 weeks, and he accepted. And he was able to see his daughter Immacolata again and meet her family. He deserved that trip, and I am so glad that it happened. So here's our family passion once again, that amazing tomato. And that's it.
Thank you, Regina, for this lovely story. If anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We have just a few minutes left and we can take questions from here. Regina, I love that this line, "Send me the tomato seeds," had just this one line seems to have had such a big impact on the story of your family and these tomato seeds. Were the tomato seeds themselves what made you start researching your family story, or was it kind of the other way around?
Well, it was agreeing to do this talk that really got me digging deeply. No, I mean, my sister and I have been doing our family ancestry, at least since 2010. But we hadn't done that much digging into this part of the family because finding records in Italian, and we don't really speak Italian, didn't seem very easy. But time makes things easier. And other people who are related to us some distant way have done a lot of the research, and that really helped me along. And also Ancestry, as I showed some of that information that Ancestry provided, really helped me understand the situation and why they decided to do this, what seems impossible thing to me, and move here.
Oh. I have a question from Spencer Carter coming in. Spencer asks, what is the flavor compared to something like a San Marzano?
I think they're actually similar. And I know what you're talking about. So there's a place in Las Vegas called Batista's Hole in the Wall, this restaurant. And I'll never forget that I walked into this restaurant in Las Vegas and I said, oh my gosh, I am in my grandmother's kitchen. It was the smell. It's impossible to describe the smell. And so I had to ask, I said, why does this smell like my grandmother's kitchen? And they said, we use only San Marzano tomatoes that are grown just for us. We cook them for 24 hours slow in giant vats in the kitchen. And so, I always wondered, well, was our tomato a San Marzano? It turns out it's not, but they must be related because identical chemical smell profile to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was just smell memory is one of the strongest things we have.
Yeah.
And it was really, so yes, I would say they're like big San Marzanos, sort of.
Nice. I love how your family story is you wove your family story into the story of tomatoes and the history of people eating tomatoes. Do you feel like the rest of your family feels that tomatoes are strongly featured in your family culture?
So, it's interesting. They do, but they want me to grow them and they want to eat them.
I've heard that
So
before.
not everybody got the gardening bug. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, it seems like relatively few of us are dedicated growers. My sister is sort of small scale growing, but she hadn't really grown the family tomatoes until recently. My cousins are giving it a shot, and I'm very proud of them for that. And hopefully we'll all get better at it as we figure out how it's done where we live.
Nice. I have a question here from Olivia Carlson. Olivia is asking, what are some of your favorite dishes to make with these tomato varieties?
Oh gosh. Well, I personally don't eat the high yield. Again, I see it as purely something that you also grow because you need it for the sauce. So the tomato sauce is the thing. I actually meant to have, some photos of, our, ziti with tomato sauce and things like that. But I will tell you that my Aunt Madeline was famous for her baked ziti. It was the thing that disappeared first at all the family engagements and whatnot. And she definitely made the sauce just like my grandmother made the sauce. And so that's something that, given a minute or two, I could probably share how one does that. So I could try to send it to you to send out, or I can
Sure.
just tell you
Yeah,
really
we
quick.
can add it actually to
It's
the chat here in this
okay.
session too.
All right. I'm afraid I can't multitask, so it's gonna be hard for me to do both
Oh,
potentially.
that's okay. We can
So,
add it later and people can come
okay.
back to it if
All
now is
right.
not an easy time.
Um,
Um, yeah, I have a comment here from Jacqueline. Jacqueline is saying, thank you so much for sharing your story. Jacqueline is inspired to do the same with their family's food history. They're from Puerto Rico, and Jacqueline lives in Wisconsin. So it should be interesting to learn more
Jacqueline,
about
I'd
that
love to
family
see
history.
that. That'd
Yeah.
be really neat.
I have one more question for you before we go. I know that you have um, shared these seeds with Seed Savers Exchange, and you also share them on the online exchange.
Mhm.
Um, we have links to those here, and we'll share them again in the chat. But can you just describe what that process is like and how people can get these seeds to grow themselves if they're interested?
So I have been telling folks that if you just send me your address, I will send you the seeds for free. I mean, I'm probably undercutting Seed Savers Exchange by doing that, but I have a limited number of them. I don't have the amount that I expect that Seed Savers will have. As a matter of fact, I'm actually out of the high yield for this year. Um, but I do expect to save a bunch for this coming year of both varieties. And it's very simple. You can reach me in a multitude of ways. All of those are in the exchange catalog. And you let me know and I'll send it out. To me, it's sort of the least I can do for the effort that my grandfather and my uncle put in over many years to make sure that these don't evaporate. If I send them to you, do me the favor and really try to grow them. I know it's not easy. My first year was terrible, as I said. You're going to have to keep trying probably until you get it right for you. But once you do, you will be rewarded.
Great. And once again, those links are in the chat here to get the high yield tomato and the Rizzi softball tomato through the exchange. Regina, we have a few more requests for recipes. So if you do want to send that this way, we can tack this
Okay.
onto the chat here as
All
well.
right. Let me see if I can, gotta find it. That's the hard part.
Yeah, no problem. And we can do that later. So we
Okay.
will
All
have
right.
that back on here as soon as we have it.
Ah,
For
here we go.
now, oh,
So
you have it.
I have it's an attachment. Is that something I can do?
Let's try it. You can send it to me via this chat here and I'll see what I
Okay.
can do.
So is it, yeah, but will it let me attach things in the chat?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so. Hmm.
We can
Uh,
get that later.
yep.
How about this? We will put this in the chat and attach it to this session. If you all want to check back here later, that will be in the chat as soon as we have it. For the moment, Regina, thank you so much for sharing this story.
Mhm.
Thank you all for watching and best of luck with all of your tomatoes.
Yes. Bye.